Welcome to the LeapSheep Startup Builder Live Q&A. This is the place for any startup founder to ask burning questions that are keeping you up at night and get answers from experts who have worked with hundreds of founders and their teams. My name is Sarah Bell and I am your host today. I'm a co-founder and startup building advisor at LeapSheep. At LeapSheep, we are on a mission to flip the 95% startup failure rate by making expert startup building guidance and support accessible, affordable, and personalized for all founders. To all founders who have joined us live, it is great to have you here. This show is all about supporting founders like you to get from an idea to build a business model that can get to product market fit, scale up safely, and whilst avoiding the 95% startup failure rate. Thanks also to founders who've sent questions in advance. If you have questions as we go, please do drop them into the live stream comments section and we will prioritize those to answer today. Today, I'm joined by LeapSheep co-founder and CEO Kirk Drage. Kirk established Microsoft's startup ecosystem across Asia Pacific from zero to tens of thousands of startups. He's lived and worked in Silicon Valley, working in multiple startups on leading edge AI, software, and hardware. He's a serial angel investor. And after making more startup mistakes than he thought possible and realizing that this was normal for startups and their investors, in 2016, he co-founded LeapSheep to tackle this problem. Welcome, Kirk. What is top of mind for you this week?
I think I've had some great conversations this week on investor alignment with better quality outcomes. I was reading a really interesting article by Dr. Jeffrey Funk about how we're not seeing the quality of companies come out of the last decade that we've seen previously. And a lot of that has to do with having better alignment and processes around creating better companies. And a great conversation with someone in Europe this week that's their investment fund is around the sustainable development goals, and rather than a technology or an industry alignment, which I think is a fabulous approach.
No, absolutely, and much needed, I think. Rob, we are delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be on.
Rob is the CEO and founder of Accelerate, a leading go-to-market solutions consulting firm. Rob's got 2 decades of hands-on experience in startups, and he's an expert in go-to-market strategy, helping organizations to clearly define their value proposition and execute effective sales and marketing strategies. Rob, you've been a first employee and CRO at a startup that you helped lead to a successful exit, and you've also led a scale-up to a successful exit as their head of sales. It is great to have you here. You've gone from microbiologist to the startup world. Why did you make that shift?
Yeah, great question, Sarah. So, yeah, I spent 7 years as a microbiologist in the pharmaceutical manufacturing area and worked my way up into training and then leadership roles. And as I did that, I made a very important discovery that I actually like people better than bacteria. And that was a very light bulb moment, pivotal moment for me. And so I took that experience from leadership there and started writing, delivering and selling leadership training programs and found a real connection between leadership and sales. It's all about helping people to solve problems. So I then took those sales skills and moved into the world of startups, and I haven't looked back since. Really enjoy working with founders to help them take their vision and their idea and then execute it into a realistic outcome and business. So yeah, that's been my journey and haven't looked back since.
Fabulous. Great to have you here. All right, I'm going to start with the first question that's come in, which is, what is the biggest problem that you see in the market that continues to cause so many startups to fail? And Rob, I'll start with you.
Yeah, beautiful. It's a very important question. Thanks, Sarah. So for me, the biggest problem is lack of validation, and whether that's validation of the actual problem itself that they're trying to solve. Is it a problem? Who has the problem? And why is it a problem? Or even once they've validated that, then validation, is their solution actually going to solve that problem? And who is their solution going to solve that problem for? So you can't do too much validation, and as a founder should always be validating. You've never finished validating and then iterating and building, listening to feedback. So I think that's the biggest lesson founders need to learn. And I think it's the biggest problem out there. And the main reason that startups are failing is they're just not doing enough validation. And they don't know how to do that validation a lot of the time as well.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? It's both of those things in such volume. It's the validation of the customer type, the problem, as you say, the solution approach. Even before you start working on a product, I think there's just this persistent myth that we have from the Apple backstory, or a lot of these Silicon Valley companies where you think it's all about having the idea and building a product and launching it, and that's a really, really expensive way to test whether there's a market there. And as you say, Rob, it's knowing that's one thing. A lot of founders, I think, do know sort of in the back of their mind that they probably should do a little bit more before they build a product, but they don't really know how, and so they never act on that thought in the back of their mind.
Yeah, and I think as well, adding to that, the problem is exacerbated to a large degree by investors and the investor landscape. A lot of the time, founders get investment and they almost take that as validation themselves that they're onto something, and then double down. And then the investors say, right, build, get it out there, sell more. And a lot of the time they're throwing people or they're throwing product out there expecting to get an outcome, when really they should be throwing the resources at validating the problem, validating the solution. Yeah.
Just to add a little more there, because I think that the issue of validation and actually how to validate is such an important one, and it's one that we've spent years working with founders on, and the answer about when is the right time to do that validation is if you're already building your startup, then right now is the best time to focus on that validation. And if you're at the very early stages, then you're in luck because you haven't done all the expensive product building and failed marketing campaigns, failed Google ads that demonstrate that you don't have that validation. We have a number of resources on the LeapSheep.com homepage, newsletters that specifically go through the approach. It's and just to kind of recap it really quickly, it's all around once you have an idea and a hypothesis of exactly who your ideal customers are, then it's around going out and before you do anything more with your idea or your product idea, speaking to as many of those people as you can about that situation and their context, what success looks like for them and the things that are keeping them up at night. And actually then, only then do you see their problems and challenges. Never should you go and show somebody your product idea or your product and ask them for feedback, because you miss that critical validation step, which is understanding them and their situation independent of your product. And of course, then you get that validation and you can present your first solution concept based on delivering value to solve that first problem or challenge. And then you can get feedback on it because you're presenting it to them in context and saying, if I built this, would this solve a problem for you? And would you use it? And more importantly, would you pay to use it? And it is that level of validation that is required. And it's hard. It is so hard to do, but it's so worth it. Because now more than ever, more and more products are getting launched into the market. And it's so noisy that not only do you need validation that your product is worth building, but the only way to cut through the noise is to build those really strong relationships with your potential customers when you're in research stage, because then they remember you and will work with you to help you to be successful.
So true.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I kind of went on a bit there, which is a little more than for a host, but I do think it's the question that we get asked all of the time, which is how do you do that validation? So hopefully that's given a framework for founders that are listening to follow.
I know we're all very passionate about this topic, I think, and I don't know why this continues to be so controversial. Because you listen to Michael Siebel from Y Combinator, and he says exactly the same thing. So it's not as if we're saying anything that's kind of weird or outlandish or different. This is well understood in the startup world as being best practice, but still not done by the vast majority of startups.
Absolutely. So sorry, Rob, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. when you're doing validation, don't just listen to friendly people in your network, because they'll always tell you what you want to hear. It's important that you're getting validation from the people who have got the problem. I've spoken to many founders who say they've done validation, but they've just gone out to people that they already know. They're only telling them what they want to hear, and they haven't done the real validation with the people who actually have the problem.
Yeah, Rob, you've segued nicely onto our next question, which is, what are the common pitfalls when they're actually validating a startup idea? And that's spot on. Like, if you're talking to people who like you, who know you, who aren't in your target customers, then their feedback is encouraging, but next to useless when it comes to actually building a startup. What are the other common pitfalls that you've seen, Rob? Are there any others that you've seen?
Yeah, the other thing too is asking the wrong type of question. So if you're going to validate your startup idea, you've got to ensure that you're asking the right questions. So asking a question like, would you use this? It doesn't really validate your solution. It's got to come down, will they actually spend money? And you touched on this before, Sarah, are they actually willing to pay to solve this problem? Is it a big enough problem that they're going to put money on the table to actually solve it? So validating that, so not just validating would they use it, but validating would they pay for it. That is the step that is often missed from my experience in terms of validating that startup idea. The other thing too is when you're doing that validation, and you touched on this before, Sarah, is just making sure you're validating it and targeting your ideal customer profile. So you've got to make sure the right people are the ones that you're talking to.
Great. Kirk, how about you? Anything extra to add there?
Couldn't agree more. I think Rob's just touched on, that ideal customer profile. I think we see so many founders that, they understand that they need to be pursuing a big opportunity. And so they're thinking big. Some founders are not, and that's a problem. But most of them are, and the ones that are, they're then thinking too big in terms of they're trying to, attack that entire market opportunity all at once, rather than breaking down that big global market opportunity that they're going to uncover and grow into over the next decade or so. Break that down into what's a much smaller market that you can win in over the next year or 2 years. We call that the beachhead market. And so, as Rob was saying, having that ICP or that ideal customer profile, and really understanding your customer. And I think, having been doing this in the startup space for, the best part of 2 decades, I think every couple of years, I think I've had an understanding of what ICP means. And then you go, I know I didn't understand it. Now I understand what it means. And you just keep having these, light bulb moments, I think, on this journey, because to really understand a customer, you really have to be able to know what they're thinking before they're thinking. You have to know the context of, why they're behaving the way they're behaving. And when they're given a choice, are they going to go left or right? It's that real level of understanding that's going to give you the validation you need to know that it's worth putting, so much time and effort and money into building solutions. And I think that's what many of us that have been on this journey kind of learn the hard way.
Yeah.
Is that it's a very expensive learning. If we can help founders, shortcut that and give them that, that advice and gold before they start, they'll save themselves so much pain.
Yeah. The other element there, I think, is of all possible segments that you could go after in your go-to-market strategy, most founders have got a really strong idea of the people that they really want to help, who need it the most, but they are not necessarily the best customers to start with, the best early adopter customers. And if you look kind of through history at various unicorns, like if you look at Tesla, the vision there was for normal people to be able to afford an electric vehicle, but actually the starting point was extraordinarily wealthy Silicon Valley kind of tech bros who wanted a way to show off like the newest tech to their friends, and that was a segment that could pay. And it's identifying early adopter customers that have a problem, who that are willing to pay to solve it, that is critical to get you started. And that, I think, is a big tension for many founders that want to have a big social impact, is doing that step first, because it may not be your ideal customers, but it's the ones where you can get a traction in the market and then move from there into the markets that you really, really want to help.
Yeah, and I think building on that.
Cool. So Rob then Kirk.
I I was going to say, building on that, Sarah, is a lot of founders get super excited about their solution, and they're so deep in the area and their expertise that they go out and they try to validate their solution before they've actually validated the problem. And I think that's another area. They need to validate the problem first and make sure that it is actually a problem before they look to validate their solution. So yeah, they get really excited, understandably, and go out there going, I've got this amazing tool, would you use it? Before they've actually gone, is this a problem for you? And why? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think on that point, Rob, founders that are experts in the problem tend to be really poor representations of their customers. Their customers are usually not as passionate and not as invested in building the solution. Their customers are time poor. They're busy. They've got other things going on in life, and so you're generally not representative as a founder, even if you come from the industry that you're solving a problem for, and you've actually had the problem before yourself. Generally, you're a really poor version of your own customer, and it's getting out of your mindset and into that customer's mindset that's so key. But building on your point, Sarah, I think what you're describing there is around which is the right first segment to go into. This is your go-to-market strategy. And this is where I think, a lot of founders are not getting the right kind of advice and guidance around, because your go-to-market strategy is going to be dependent on the market that you're going into and the cost of whatever solution you're building. And you're looking to minimize, the sales cycle on the cost of customer acquisition in your first market, so you can demonstrate the momentum and get the momentum. You don't have very much resources, so you need momentum quickly. So the first market is really a market, as you described in that example, which is a market that you can build momentum in quickly. It's not about necessarily the most profitable or the largest segment. It's about momentum and making your job as a founder easier. But the other part of the question is, what's your capital strategy? If you've got more or less capital, you may have to choose different segments. And so you go to market strategy is quite a complex design, and you want some experience behind you to help you figure out that approach. Otherwise, you run out of money before you get there.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to ask, so Rob, you work with kind of early stage startups, but many also that are going from kind of first customers and repeatable sales and kind of repeatable sales processes and more into scale ups. So this question, I'll see if you kind of who you want to target this for. How do you recommend founders balance short-term revenue goals with long-term strategic growth?
Yeah, this is a common challenge. So when you're looking to scale your business, and it really comes down to a few different factors. So if you're looking at short-term revenue goals and long-term strategic growth, you've got to look at what's your runway. So what have you got sitting there to be able to support you, and that can influence how much effort you put into your long-term versus your short-term. If you've got a short runway, obviously your short-term revenue goals take priority over your long-term strategic growth. Otherwise, your business doesn't last. But if you've got your runway, you might focus more on your long-term strategic growth. So that's the number one factor that you need to take into consideration. The other step is, in terms of your long-term strategic growth, what portion of that is going to be based around upsell versus new business? Because if you're at that stage where you're looking to scale, you've got a validated and substantial existing customer base. Is your long-term strategic growth part of adding additional product sets or building upon your existing customer base to grow your revenue and build new pathways to revenue? Or is your long-term strategic growth perhaps looking into new regions, in which case that's a potentially a much bigger investment and requires a lot more focus than looking to get revenue out of your existing customer base. So there's a few factors that you need to consider, but ultimately the balance comes down to how much runway have you got to play with to enable you to focus more on the long term versus the short term.
And before I come to you, Kirk, what kind of runway do you advise founders that they need in order to know that they can focus on long-term strategic growth?
It's a very dependent question in terms on the type of business. I mean, if you're a transactional business and you've got a short sales cycle and you can turn business around pretty quickly, then your runway doesn't necessarily need to be as long. If you've got a much longer sales cycle and you're more enterprise focused business, then your runway needs to be longer to support any sort of long-term strategic play, because it's going to take a lot longer for you to get established either in the new area or with a new product line. So you've got to take those factors into consideration.
Okay, Kirk, anything extra you want to add or clarify?
Yeah, I think another perspective for founders on this is looking at investor alignment. So different investors have different time horizons. And so, often as a founder, if you really believe in the opportunity of what you're building to go global and really scale, you've got a very long-term time horizon. And so, I think about a company like Amazon, which is, for decades just reinvested and reinvested and reinvested in itself, which has allowed it to be as successful as it has, because it's got a very long-term patient horizon. And I think one of the challenges that founders often find themselves in is they raise capital from investors that have a much shorter time frame. And those investors are looking to really pump up the growth in the short term so they can have a quick exit. And founders don't necessarily understand that until they're well down the track. And so making sure that you're aligned on your time horizon, I think is really, really important, because you want to think about how much value can you create, and then how much value can you capture, and how long is that actually going to take? You look at the global success stories. It takes longer than most people kind of think. A lot of founders that you talk to that are early in their journey, you say, how long do you want to be running the company for? The most common answer I hear is sort of 5 years, but that's not really a realistic time frame for most companies. 10 years is sort of a minimum to get a reasonable outcome. You might be lucky and get there sooner, and good luck to you if you do. But it's a case of you've got to hope for the best and plan for the worst.
That's a really critical point. And of course, it creates so much tension, particularly if you have investors with conflicting ideas of the time frames as well. So yeah, absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, often founders, why would they be thinking of those timeframes when they're having conversations with investors? So that's a really critical point. You make that, Kirk.
Those investors help to set inappropriate timeframes, because an investor's like, well, I want to be out in 5 years. That's my time horizon, but may not be a good alignment for the company.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Now, one question here, and this I think is a really critical question, is, and again, there's kind of two parts to this. So what is the sales approach for startups, particularly early stage startups? And then how does that move across as you go from a startup to a startup that's reached product market fit and is then scaling? Before I hand the floor over to you, I will just rewind to the element that I talked about earlier on, which is that user research framework, which is that your first selling is actually not selling at all. It's customer conversations to validate that there's a problem, and then testing your solution. So I'll just kind of remind of that. And then Kirk, I'll get you started on this before handing over to Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk. I can talk to both ends, having had corporate sales experience and training corporate sales teams, as well as from the startup side. We often talk about the phrase founder-led sales, which I think is a great way to sort of position the conversation for startups. Is you don't know what your sales process is as a startup until you learn it. And I think the best analogy is you're a little bit like an AI engine. Every customer that you encounter, you get a little bit of data that can train you on, well, is this the right customer? Is this the right problem? How do I talk about the problem in a way that the customer understands and feels like I'm empathizing with them? How do I position my solution in a way that they understand and they don't have objections or concerns? And it requires dozens and dozens of conversations to get all of that right. A sales call is a bit like a performance art. It's a bit like learning your lines, and then you have to do the performance in real time. And what you hoped how you hoped you'd perform is often not how it actually goes when you're in the middle of a call. And you reflect on the call and you go, boy, I wish I had said that then, or I wish I had done this. And so it just takes repetition. But sales-led growth and founder-based selling is such an efficient way to learn about your customer, even though it feels like it's the most inefficient way. We all want to put an ad out on Google and a website that can collect someone's money, and we want that to be the sales process, the product-led growth strategy. But it's really that sales-led growth, the founder-led growth, that's going to teach you what all the language is going to be and what the customer experience is to create the product-led growth. I won't talk about the scale-up side. I'll hand over to Rob, because I'm sure he's got lots of insights that he can share, and I'll tack back on at the end.
Yeah, no, it's just building on what you said. Definitely from a startup perspective, a mistake I see made quite often is bringing in salespeople too soon. And the role of the founder is to establish that sales function and build and identify how's it going to work. And as you say, continue to validate and learn from those sales conversations. So definitely from a startup perspective, it's predominantly, or should be, founder-led sales for as long as possible to enable them to build that out. One of the things I see is a lot of hesitancy and reticence to actually do that, particularly from tech-based founders. They're just not comfortable. They're not people. And so they don't like doing the sales part, but it's something that they should be doing to continue to validate and learn and build out that sales process. And then what they do when they're moving into scale-up mode, I always say your first sales hire should not be one. It should be a minimum of 2 people, because if you hire one person, it doesn't work out. You don't know if it's the person or if you haven't got your positioning right, or your sales process or your validation's not complete. So you don't know. Whereas if you hire 2 or 3 and 1 or 2 of them work out and one doesn't, you know that you've at least got your positioning going. If someone's able to sell it, then you're on the right track. And those that are failing are most likely due to the individual and not the product or the process. So in terms of stepping into scale up, hire at least 2 sales reps, and hire the reps first before you hire a sales leader. So you still need to be involved as the founder. You've built that sales process. So you need to be the one managing and instructing, guiding, coaching those initial sales hires. You don't want to hire someone who, if you're hiring a sales leader, probably they've been used to tracking metrics and building sales processes and coaching sales reps, not necessarily doing the sales themselves. When you're moving it to scale up, you need to have doers who are there, who are going to actually execute the sales for you. And then once you've got those first 2 or 3 hires singing, and you've exceeded 1 mil ARR and you're moving up, that's when you bring in your sales leader. So you need someone to come in, then take over from you as a founder, so you can then focus on your growth strategy. So the approach, once you're really into scale up land, is you've then got your sales leader, you've got 2 or 3 sales reps, and that sales leader takes over the motion and ownership of sales moving forward.
Okay, great. So the question then, Kirk, did you want to add anything before I move on?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot to unpack there, Rob. I think there's some great points there, and the point about the resistance of some founders and founding teams to want to get into sales is such an important one to address. And we spend a lot of time helping founders transition into becoming sellers, and usually that resistance to selling is a real positive, because it generally, what they're resistant to is they're not really sure how to put on the sales kind of face, as they call it, and act as if they've got all charismatic and can be that kind of salesperson that we all kind of have in our mind. But no one generally wants to work with that kind of person. People want authenticity. They like people they can trust. And so generally people that think they're bad at sales can actually be really good because they're just really authentic and they're not using any sort of fancy language. And customers really warm to that. And when you realize as a founder that you can actually help people and it's not about selling, it's about helping. And you don't want to sell things to people that you can't help. And so this whole idea of sort of sales goes out the windows and you can actually help people and getting founders comfortable with that. And it's a journey. And I find that founders need their handheld sort of through that journey. You can't just sort of give them a bunch of information or give them a book and go away and turn them into salespeople. That's why coaching is, so critical to help them through that process. Really, really, really important.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, so then back to the point you made, Rob, and again, this is really resources rather than resource. When does the founder know to hire their first 2 salespeople?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it comes down to is it a repeatable process? So has the founder established something that they're now doing consistently, they're doing the same thing over and over, they feel like they've got something that's working and resonating and is scalable until they're at that point. So if this sales meeting is different to the next one, which is different to the next one, they're still iterating, they're still learning, they're not yet ready to hire that sales resource. They need to be in a position where they're doing the same thing repeatedly. That's when they're ready to hire that sales resource. And once they've got demand as well. The other key thing there is you've got to have the demand to support the resource. If you're a startup, generally you're not full of cash, with some exceptions, but you've got to be in a position where you've got the demand to support bringing in that resource, and you've got a repeatable process that you can train them on. They're the 2 main factors that influence whether or not you're ready to hire your first sales resource.
Yeah, really, really good points. I probably have a slightly different perspective on your 2 resources, Rob, but I think the underlying principle that you're advocating for, which is have a process before you bring a salesperson in, I think is so important. And I think this is the root cause of so many failures when it comes to hiring salespeople is you hire a salesperson, you have no process for them to sell. They might be very good at selling and it's not their fault. If you just ask them to sell and they have got no collateral and no process with which to apply their expertise, it's like hiring a painter and not giving them paint or a brush and expecting them to paint a picture. Is maybe an analogy, and so it's so important. And I think unless you've created sales process before, you're probably going to need someone to help you through that process. And as you say, when you've finished and you've got it right, when you're getting to the point where sales calls become relatively monotonous. I know I was in a call with a professional services firm a few weeks ago, and these guys are very, very good at what they do. They're at the top of their game, and they want to build a product. And so we had a conversation about helping them do that. And they said, we've never built a product before. This is also new to us. And I said, that's all right. I've done this, hundreds of times. I can walk you through a process. And they said, I feel like we're the customer in our call. And I said, that's exactly what it is. And I said, when you talk to your customers, you probably know what they're going to say before they open their mouth because you've done this so many times. I said, well, now I'm in that position with you where I'm not sure you're going to be able to tell me anything that I haven't heard before. I mean, I'm always surprised, but it's unusual. And that's the level of monotony that you want to get to. And that's the level of, understanding of your customers that you need before you really want to start hiring professional salespeople. Because then you can tell them all the knowledge that you've got and they're not going to be surprised. They're not going to get out on a sales call and be surprised by what they learn.
I think that's so true because I think as we've very much followed the founder-led sales model ourselves, and you do then, and I think there's the guardrails that when you start to hire sales resources, they need guardrails. Whereas when you're the founder, you can, and you're learning new things or new opportunities arise, you can spot them or you can communicate in a particular way because you know so much about your business and how and the direction you want to take it in. And of course, sales resources don't have that. They don't have the accountability and they don't know all the nuances. And so that element of routine repeatability is so critical.
100%. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move us next on to leadership, because I think leadership it can look very, very different in startups than it does in large corporations or in established businesses. And Kirk, I'll put this to you first. How do you approach leadership in a startup that's capable of high growth? And what lessons have you learned from your own leadership journey?
Yeah, wow. Too many to count, Sarah. I think probably the first one is alignment. Is one of the areas where I see a lot of teams going wrong. Is making sure you've got really strong alignment, because when you're in a high growth environment, people have to have a certain sense of autonomy. You have to allow people to go off and make things happen and get things done. And if there's misalignment, then when they come back and say, I've done X or I've done Y, you might be surprised at what that is, and that creates conflict. And so, creating those really strong goals, and one of the reasons to have goals is to create alignment and spend the time with the team to really talk through to make sure you are aligned. And then the other thing is, I think, have great leadership. You have to be able to be engaged with your business leaders. And so, you can't, for example, be a non-technical founder and hire a technical founder and just kind of say, well, I hope they know what they're doing because I've got no idea about how they do their job. And so I think it's really important to take the time to learn about how other functions work so that you can ask the right kind of questions. And that may mean that you've got to sit down with those people and say, teach me about how your job works. Like, I don't need to know the details. I call it the sort of car factory kind of overview where, like, how a car's made, you see sort of rubber and steel come in one end, and it's like, well, that the engines get cast over there and machined, and then the body gets put together there, and then the seats get put together there, and then the thing gets painted over there. And so you have this very high level overview of sort of how the car gets put together. You don't need to know the details. You don't have to be a fitter and turner. You don't have to be a roboticist or anything else, but you kind of understand the process. And when cars are not coming out the end of the line, you can kind of go, well, where is the problem? At what step is the problem? And you can sort of ask intelligent questions and troubleshoot. And I think it's really important that executives are able to do that for each other, because often your own function you're too close to. You can't see the forest for the trees because you're so deep into it. And so you really want to be able to rely on your team around you to help you be successful. And I think that's part of the job, is to separate the work to be done from the people, be very supportive of the people and the challenges that they're going through, and help them get the work done, and not combine those two things together. And if the work's not getting done, get upset with the people. That generally doesn't help.
No, good. I think Agile is a really great way to get that alignment as well, kind of setting goals and then having 2-week sprint cycles and the team keeping aligned, as well as kind of paying attention and learning in the way you've described. Rob, from your perspective, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, and I think building on what you said, Sarah, around the Agile methodology, within Agile, you've got your daily stand-ups, which is 10, 15 minutes connect. In those early days when you've got that small team, doing that daily stand-up and connect, hey, this is what I learned yesterday, this is what I'm focusing on today, just brings everyone together, it shares the learnings, and communication is so important in that high growth environment. You all need to stay on board and make sure you're all, as you said, Kirk, all aligned, all rowing in the same direction, and that you're continuing to work on what's relevant for the stage of growth that you're at. So I think the communication and having that daily stand up as per the Agile methodology, just to continue that you're all learning from the mistakes that you're making and what you're discovering as you go through that high growth.
Yeah, no, absolutely critical. Rob, and I think we'll do because I always think stories are a great way of learning, and I love all of the possibilities that storytelling involves. I'll get you both to explain a few of these. So, can you share some specific examples of founders and their situations, and then how you've helped them to refine their value proposition and go-to-market strategy? Kirk, I'm going to start with you, and then Rob, over to you.
Yeah. There's lots of examples. One that really comes to mind for a very technical startup that was building a quite a revolutionary breakthrough product. They were very focused on the technology and getting the system working. And we looked at the system, and we pretty quickly realized that the system was composed of many parts, and just one of those parts was very mature compared to the rest of the system. And so they were sort of focusing on the rest of the system. And we looked at it and said, why can't we commercialize just this one widget that you've built that's fully mature? There's a market segment that we can identify that has a need, that we can package this as a solution. Let's go build this as a solution. You can get to market quicker. You can start working with your customers quicker, so you can get relationships and feedback. And we essentially were able to pull forward their revenue by 2 years by doing this compared to their plan when they first met us. That meant that they didn't have to raise capital as soon as they thought they would, and they didn't have to dilute the valuation of the company, or their equity rather. So that's one real example, and I think different founders have different challenges when it comes to go-to-market strategy. But I think this is one really, really common one when we're working with technical founders, where they can envision a real breakthrough product that may require many components, where if we can create a little bit of a ladder or a series of stepping stones, we can really help them be much more successful with much less risk by bringing revenue forward.
Yeah, that's really great, because I think so much of the time, and this is one of the great things about working with founders, is they've got such a big vision for kind of all of the potential segments that they could ever go after, all of the products and the really detailed marketplaces, products, this, that, and the other, that they feel like they want to build everything all at once. And actually, it does not, and it should not be that way, because you need to get that validation at each stage, and so that's absolutely critical. Really, that's a really good example. Rob, how about you?
Yeah, I've got an interesting one here. So a number of times now we've had founders who have come to us and have said, we've got this solution, we're targeting consumers. So we've got a B2C solution. So as is quite often the case, I ask, what's the problem that you're solving? And they talk through what the problem, they had experienced the problem themselves. But I then ask, okay, who's going to pay for this? How are you actually going to get people to pay to solve this problem? So they went away and did some validation. The answer was no. But in that process, we came up with some ideas and some solutions in terms of how could they convert this into a B2B solution. So there was actually a problem within businesses. So they were targeting how to find and keep track of things within the house. And so we suggest, well, what about Airbnbs and holiday rentals and those sort of things? It's a much bigger problem for property managers to get interrupted when guests say, hey, where's the spare towels? Where's this? So we actually pivoted that founder's value proposition and go-to-market strategy from being B2C to being B2B. And because of that, they're now able to actually monetize sooner and get more traction. They've validated it with the B2B, and it's a real problem within that sector. So it's because the founders experience the problem themselves and it's an issue for them, they think that other people might actually pay for it. But a lot of the time, the problem's not big enough for people to invest in the solution. Whereas if you look at ways, where is that problem occurring at scale, you're more likely to be able to find someone who's going to pay to fix that problem.
Yeah, it's a great example, Rob, and I think it really highlights one of the challenges that we see with founders, where every founder knows they need a developer that's going to create a solution. Every founder knows they need a marketing person and a salesperson, but the skill that you're describing the expertise required to create a go-to-market strategy often falls through the cracks. The development team often doesn't have that skill set. The marketing team doesn't have that skill set. And even if you're using professional external services from an external development agency or an external marketing agency, it's quite often not within their wheelhouse either, because if they're working with established businesses, as they often are, then go-to-market strategy might not be a thing they even need. This tends to be something that's a real niche need for startups and mature companies that are bringing brand new products to market or entering new markets, which is a fairly niche kind of specialist need that businesses don't need every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't mind sharing one example as well, because I think this, whilst these are typically not founders that we have worked with, they are founders that we meet all of the time. And it's the founders who have put so much emphasis on hiring dev teams to build out a product idea. And again, they've put so much emphasis, they've had an idea, they've thought about a product that they want to build, all of the features and the functions and everything else. And they've often got a very broad go-to-market strategy. So I was talking with a founder this week who's tackling mental health for people of kind of 30 to 50 age range. And he's already kind of well on the way for building the software. His dev team is, he's having regular catch-ups with his dev team. He's got all this functionality that he's thinking and already building into the product. And yet he has not spoken yet to a single individual person that fits in that incredibly broad strategy. And of course, if you're in that situation, then, well, actually, how do you know what you're building? And how do you know what the market needs where there's an unmet need that's not currently met? So this particular person is very much at risk of building yet another mental health app that sits in the App Store and is downloaded and used by nobody. Or if it is used, it might be downloaded once. People look at the features and then never go to it again. And this is so classic with the founders that we meet. And it's not founders' fault. They're constantly energized by investors to think really big about these big markets and the potential that they could have, and the TAM SAM and these massive calculations, but actually starting so broad and without doing that critical work to identify an ideal segment and then go and speak individually to those individuals. Without that, the value proposition is too broad and misses the mark, and the go-to-market strategy is too big and it cannot be chunked down. And I think that's a critical one to raise, because sometimes founders are so invested in that route that they can't move from it. And unfortunately, that strategy, without changing to focus really heavily on validation, it becomes too late to change and to pivot and to shift.
And to build on Rob's point earlier, Sarah, on that, I'm sure that there are going to be investors out there that really identify with that issue of mental health. Maybe they've had mental health issues or family members, and so they're really bought into the need, and they understand that there's a need out there, and so they're quite likely to invest just because they know the need's out there, but they don't necessarily have the skills or understanding for how to do what you're talking about, which is build a go-to-market strategy and validate that there's a need in the segments that are chosen. And the same with grant programs that are out there. So a lot of founders get pushed along to do the wrong thing by very well-meaning people that are very credible and authentic, but ultimately it sends them down a very dangerous path.
Which takes us nicely onto our next question, Kirk. What is the most important thing or things for founders to consider when they're building out a go-to-market plan or a go-to-market strategy? Kirk, I'll start with you and then back to Rob.
Yeah, really good. I think there's a few things. One is is the size of the market worth going after at all? It's probably the first one. We've worked with a number of founders where, particularly because we do quite a bit of work in the space industry, where they want to build things where the market is incredibly tiny. And, when you're working with a market that has, maybe dozens of customers globally at most, that is a really high risk business, because sales is a probability game. People are not ready to buy, even if they've got the problem, There may be staff turnover, budget issues, even though they've got the problem and they're going to spend the money, if they don't spend the money when you need them to spend the money, your business is not going to work. So that's probably number one, is making sure that the market is big enough. And then the second thing is then looking at what is the first beachhead within that market that makes the most sense for the founder, and looking at that beachhead through the lens of a quality market. And at the end of the day, one of the best definitions of a market is just a group of humans that all have the same problem and they want the problem solved in the same way. They're all going to buy it in the same way. They all want the value delivered in the same way. And a lot of founders don't have that definition of a market in their head. And when they're choosing, a market, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a human being that enters into a sales transaction. And the sales transaction is sort of the fundamental unit of, growth and revenue and profit. And so it's really, really important to sort of think about those kind of things. There's dozens of other things that you need to think about, capital strategy and other things, but they're probably two of the main ones.
Oh, great. Rob, how about you?
Yeah, obviously agree with what Kirk said there in terms of the ideal customer profile, and also going at the next level, who are the buyer personas, who are the actual people within that area that are going to engage and actually pay for the solution. But the key thing as well is a unique selling proposition. So what is unique about you? If you're going to market, you've got to have something unique that you're telling the market about. And then how are you going to get people to know you in terms of that you exist and that you solve that problem, get them to like and then eventually trust you. So every sales motion is based on trust. People buy from people that they trust, and it takes time to build that trust. So when you're building a go-to-market plan, you've got to incorporate activities and strategies to build trust within your target market. So make sure you've got something in there that's highlighting and building on your unique selling proposition that has been validated ideally, and then how do you build that trust within that market?
That's absolutely critical. I think to add into that as well is there's a model called the diffusion of innovation model, and it charts out who are your early adopter customers versus the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. And it's absolutely critical for that first beachhead segment that you pursue, that they are going to be early adopter customers. So a group of people, individuals who have the problem, they know that they have it, and ideally they're already paying to solve it, or would if there were solutions that they could pay for. And most importantly, that they are willing and able, once you've established that no trust, trust kind of the mentality that you talked about, Rob, that once they have that with you, that they are going to overinvest their time, just as you will overinvest your time, to make sure that the solution works for them, because it is such a problem that is impacting them and that they cannot solve. And it's that criticality of the early adopters that I think is so important for that first kind of bite into the overall go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, it's a great point, Sarah. And I heard someone describe this on social media in the last few weeks, sort of saying if you're proposing to solve a problem that the person that you're solving for, that problem is not on their current to-do list, that they're actually thinking about solving, then you're probably going to enter a whole world of pain. You're selling a vitamin, you're selling something that could be done rather than something that they are doing. And so now you've got to push them to change their behavior, as opposed to finding demand that's already there in the market for something that people already want to do. And I think this is a classic problem with founders. Now, not to say that you can't create new markets. Look at YouTube is probably a great example where lots of people didn't want to upload videos to the web before YouTube came along. But those kind of business models require much more patience, and you've got to have a different go-to-market strategy to build those kind of businesses, because they take a lot of time. You've got to have the right kind of capital to do that. So you've got to, it's horses for courses, and that's why go-to-market strategy building is so important, because you've got to take all these things into consideration.
Yeah, it's that education piece. You've got to incorporate education into the know, like, and trust. And that can
that's
take
right.
a very long time.
Or you just keep talking about the problem and the impact of the problem enough for a specific group of people until you find people that go, yes, that's me. They must have something useful to say because they have so clearly articulated the problem that I'm experiencing and the pain that it's causing me.
Yeah.
Okay, the last question before we wrap up for the day is, so having guided startups to successful exits, what advice would you give to founders looking to position their company for acquisition? Rob, I'll hand this to you, and then Kirk.
Yeah, from my experience, the path to successful acquisition begins with a good partnership. So if you've got some partners, or if you're looking to build a partnership strategy, identify partners that are playing in a similar space to you, but don't have your exact add-on. And for both of the examples where I've been part of successful acquisitions, those organizations have been partnerships first. What that does is that establishes trust. It validates that there's integration and that the solutions work well together, that is going to bring additional value into their customer base. So it ticks a lot of the boxes in terms of should we buy that product? Should we buy that company? So that, to me, is the best way. If you want to get acquired, identify some good partners, start those partnerships, build those relationships. And once again, it comes down to trust. Build that trust and establish that your product's actually going to bring additional value into their existing product base and customer base.
Yeah, that's great advice. The other thing that I would say is, that what I said earlier about, hoping for the best but planning for the worst, I think is really important. And so you see a lot of exits that are sort of following exactly what you're saying, Rob, where there's a real strategic need for that relationship, and the acquisition goes ahead based on that strategic need. But the cost of finding those partners can be really, really high. And if you talk to successful post-exit founders, they'll quite often tell you they had a good stroke of luck in finding that partner. It wasn't a strategy that they necessarily had that they could really execute on in a very planned way. And often when you do have a strategy and you do sort of go out in a planned way, it turns out to be much more expensive and difficult than you think, because to find that strategic alignment can be very, very tough. And so definitely, look for that strategic alignment and build those kind of relationships. But if you want to kind of plan for the worst, the best thing you can do is really target product market fit. And so if you're really focused on reliably being able to turn your customers into fans and advocates that just tell everyone else how awesome your product is, if you're reliably able to generate really strong demand because people know you as the best solution bar none to the particular product that you solve, and you've also got an efficient solution, usually based on technology that scales, without people, you can get those three things, which is product market fit, then you're going to find an acquisition much, much, much easier.
Great. All right. Thanks ever so much. Okay, that is the end of the session for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and joining us. Now, Rob, if any founders listen to this and want to book a meeting with you, they can do that. Let me just share my screen. There we go. So you can book a meeting with Rob using his LinkedIn profile, which I'm hoping is on the screen, which it is now. Here we go. So if you want extra help, particularly, I think, Rob, you work primarily with startup founders who are looking to scale. If you want any help with that, particularly around selling, kind of brand positioning, etc., then this is Rob's LinkedIn profile. Then from a LeapSheep point of view, if you are looking for an expert coach to guide your startup from idea to product market fit, you're very welcome to request a strategy session, a startup builder strategy session with us. You'll be speaking with an expert startup building advisor. You can explore your specific startup situation to develop the right goals, strategies, and actions for your situation. Don't waste time and money on approaches that won't work for you. At the moment, we are offering these for free. That may not last much longer. 45 minutes of your time, and you can find the QR code on the screen now.
or on our website. Go to www.leapsheep.com.
Absolutely. All right. Now, thank you very much to you both for joining us today and for everyone that submitted their questions in advance. We will see you again in 2 weeks, where Kirk will have special guest Scotty Allen, who is the founder and CEO at The Product Bus. We are LeapSheep, and we are working flat out to flip the startup success rate and help founders reach product market fit whilst avoiding the startup graveyard. See you all next time.
Thanks for having us.